Welcome to our video, and today we're going to be talking about ancient Egypt. But before that, let me introduce to you our members. Emman Fazon, John Patrick Teran, Maria Fiona Duran, Marley Dineros, Johanna Coral, and Hanna Mae Gayanes. Egypt, country located in the northeastern corner of Africa. Egypt's heartland, the Nile River Valley Delta, was the home of one of the principal civilizations of the ancient Middle East and, like Mesopotamia farther east, was the site of one of the world's earliest urban and literate societies. Ancient Egyptian history begins prior to the pre-dynastic period, 6000 to 3950 BCE, and continues through the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which is around 323 to 30 BCE. In the pre-dynastic period in Egypt, images of the gods and goddesses appear in sculpture and ceramics, but the people did not yet have the technical skill to raise massive structures to honor their leaders or deities. Some form of government is evident during this period, but it seems to have been regional and tribal, nothing like the central government which would appear in the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Environment of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was centered on the Nile Valley in the Sahara, Africa's largest desert. The climate of this part of the continent, which has varied from time to time, has played a major role in how humans have moved and interacted through the millennia. The Nile River was the main reason ancient Egyptian civilization was formed. Heavy rains near farther south in Africa caused the Nile River to overflow its banks every year in Egypt. When the flood waters receded, a rich black soil covered the floodplain. This black soil enabled the Egyptians to develop a successful economy based on agriculture. In Egypt's cloudless sky, the sun almost always shone, providing heat and light for them. The Nile served as transportation, a constant source of water, and the sustainer of all plants and animals. Natural barriers provided good protection from other people. The desert to the west, the seas to the north and east, and the Nile's rapids to the south prevented frequent hostile attacks. Egyptian society. So, as you can see on the images, this is the people of Egypt. This is how their houses look like. This is how they lived. And you can see all the things that they used from their time. The society of ancient Egypt was strictly divided into a hierarchy with the king at the top and then his vizier, the members of his court, priests and scribes, regional governors, eventually called nomarchs, the generals of the military after the period of the New Kingdom, artists and craftspeople, government overseers of work sites, the peasant farmers and slaves. So as you can see, the pictures here are actually the slaves. Social mobility was not encouraged, nor was it observed for most of Egypt's history, as it was thought that the gods had decreed the most perfect social order, which was in keeping with the central value of the culture, which is Ma'at, harmony and balance. Ma'at was the universal law which allowed the world to function as it should, and the social hierarchy of ancient Egypt was thought to reflect this principle.
Population and social class of the ancient Egypt. Population of Egypt was strictly divided into social classes, from the king at the top, his vizier, the members of his court, regional governors, and the generals of the government, overseers of the work sites, and the peasantry. Social mobility was neither encouraged or observed for most of Egypt's history, as it was thought that the gods had decreed the most perfect social order. Among all the social class of the ancient Egypt, the one standing at the top is the king. As the god's chosen man, he enjoyed great wealth and status, and luxuries unimaginable to the majority of the population. It was the king's responsibility to rule in keeping with Ma'at, and as this was a serious charge, he was thought to deserve those luxuries in keeping with his status and the weight of his duties. The next one, the social pyramid of the ancient Egypt, is the queen. Although female rulers are in the minority of the ancient Egypt, powerful queens are not. Their duties and many of their activities remain undocumented or at least untranslated. But there is no doubt, based on the information that is available, that these women exerted considerable influence over their husbands, the court, and the country. After the royalties are the government officials who carried out the orders of the pharaoh. Most officials came from noble families. They were powerful and wealthy and enjoyed a high quality of life. This was the highest social class after the pharaoh. Many officials were nobles who inherited their jobs, but some rose to power. The three key officials were the vizier, the chief treasurer, and the general of the armies. Standing at the top of the government official is the vizier, who had more power than anyone except the pharaoh. The vizier advises the pharaoh and carries out his commands. He appointed and supervised many of the other government officials. The vizier also served as a kind of chief judge. Other judges would bring him their toughest cases, and a vizier was expected to be fair and neutral, showing no mercy or special favor to either side in a dispute. The next one is the chief treasurer. The chief treasurer is the one in charge in handling the government's wealth. He administered the collection of taxes in order to keep the government and the economy functional. Egypt's economy was based on goods rather than money. People paid their taxes in grain, cows, cloth, and silver, which are to be collected and kept by the chief treasurer for the government's later use. The priests were also a powerful group because religion touches every part of the people's daily lives. As we know, religion is an important part of the people's lives since it serves as a basis of the values and morals of the people. It gives the priest a higher social rank because they serve as leaders of the religion. They are the ones running the temples and the ones directing the religious rituals and other religious-related activities such as burials. The next one on the social pyramid are the Egyptian doctors. In the Egyptian belief, when someone gets sick, the Egyptian doctors believe that the gods have disturbed the natural state of the body, rendering a person to become ill. Just like the doctors nowadays, Egyptian doctors are the ones in charge of treating the people with sickness and disease. Their ways of healing includes prayers and spiritual remedies, but aside from those, they also develop practical cures such as medicinal herbs to cure illness of the body. It is believed that the Egyptians were the first people to develop the profession of medicine. The top military commander in Egypt was the general of the armies. He advised the pharaoh in matters of war and national security, such as how to protect Egypt's border from invaders. He also helped the pharaoh make alliances with the other kingdoms.
Ancient Egyptian culture. The popular view of life in ancient Egypt is often that it was a death-obsessed culture, in which powerful pharaohs forced the people to labor at constructing pyramids and temples and at an unspecified time enslaved the Hebrews for this purpose. The ancient Egyptians did have a well-known contempt for non-Egyptians, but this was simply because they believed they were living the best life possible in the best of all possible worlds. Some professions in which women worked included weaving, perfume making, and entertainment. Women could also have their own business. They could own and sell property. They can also serve as witnesses in court cases. They are permitted to be in the company of men. Women in ancient Egypt could escape bad marriages by divorcing and remarrying. They are also entitled to 1/3 of the property their husbands owned. All these political and economic rights made them the most liberated females of their time. Ancient Egyptian men had certain privileges similar to most traditional societies. Interestingly, however, compared to other ancient societies of the time, there was not a huge disparity between the status of Egyptian men and Egyptian women. Both the men and women of Egypt worked and earned wages regardless of their sex. Personal hygiene and appearance was valued highly. The Egyptians bathed regularly, scented themselves with perfume and incense, and created cosmetics used by both men and women. The practice of shaving was invented by the Egyptians as was the wig and the hairbrush. The art of their makeup is focused on the eyes, which is outlined with green or black eye paint to emphasize their size and shape.
Ancient Egypt architecture. Characteristics. Ancient Egypt architecture was mostly that of the monumental temple and tombs, and featured obelisks, battered walls, pylon towers, pyramids, cavado or gorge, cornices, large columns with lotus, papyrus, palm, and other capitals, hypostyle halls, courts, vast processional axes called dromos, flanked by sphinxes, stylized sculpture, and hieroglyphics. Egyptian architecture influenced other styles. The rock-cut tombs at Beni Hassan, for example, have proto-Doric columns. Very many Egyptian motifs were absorbed by the Hellenistic Greek cultures and by the Roman Empire. And Neoclassicism, Art Deco, rational architecture, and postmodernism drew on ancient Egypt motifs. Egyptian houses. Among the lower classes, homes were built of mud bricks baked in the sun. Less wealthy people's houses were only 1 brick wide. Wood was scarce and was only used for doorways and window sills, and the roof was considered another room in the house where gatherings were routinely held, as the interior of the homes were often dimly lighted. A peasant's home was tiny by comparison. Either way, it was still very nice. Each peasant family had their own home. A door led into an open courtyard with walls, but no roof. From the courtyard, a ramp led up and the door led inside the house. The ramp led to the second floor roof where the peasant family could enjoy the evening together. Some homes had a third story with a ramp that led from the second floor roof to the third floor roof. On the other hand, wealthier people had homes constructed of a double layer or more of brick. The rich tend to have more wooden fixtures in their homes as well as more intricate designs and molds on their houses. The very wealthy lined the outside of their homes with white limestone. Limestone was very expensive, but it made their homes sparkle with the sunshine. Many homes of the rich and noble had gardens and pools both inside and outside of the house. Some pools were stocked with brightly colored fish. Gardens had daisies and cornflowers planted amongst the trees. The walls of each villa were highly decorated by the best artists their money could buy. Some walls were washed with pastel colors to brighten, lighten, and clean. Egyptian palaces. Palaces were the residences of the pharaohs and their entourage. They consisted of a complex of buildings designed to house the headquarters of power and the temples for worshipping the gods. There were 2 main sections, one to accommodate the needs of the pharaoh and the other to meet the requirements of administration. Palaces took on a distinctive architectural form around the end of the 4th millennium BC, a form that was repeated for most of the 3rd millennium. They were essentially rectangular structures consisting of high walls topped with towers. The tops of the towers were often decorated with rice cornice or panels.
Religious practices. Egyptian religion was a combination of beliefs and practices which in the modern day would include Egyptian mythology, science, medicine, psychiatry, magic, spiritualism, herbology, as well as the modern understanding of religion as belief in a higher power and the life after death. Here are the examples of gods and goddesses: Osiris, Isis, and Horus, Set, Bastet, and Thoth. Ancient Egyptians believed that if a person were properly prepared for the afterlife, his or her soul was immortal. Extensive rituals and preparation of the body for death, which included tomb building, mummification, and funerary ceremonies, was meant to protect the body and the soul for the afterlife. All tombs had 2 essential and architectural components that reflected their religious function: a burial chamber and a nearby mortuary chapel. The burial chamber was below ground and housed and protected the body and spirit. The mortuary chapel was above ground and was accessible to visitors who would perform rites and make offerings of food and drinks for the dead person. The methods of embalming or treating the dead body that the ancient Egyptians used is called mummification. Using special processes, The Egyptians removed all moisture from the body, leaving only a dried form that would not easily decay. It was important in their religion to preserve the dead body in as lifelike a manner as possible. After that, the pharaohs of Egypt usually were mummified and buried in elaborate tombs. Members of the nobility and officials also often received the same treatment and occasionally common people. However, the process was an expensive one, beyond the means of many, so animals like cats, bulls, and monkeys were also mummified for religious purposes. The ancient Egyptians believed that by burying the deceased with their organs, they may rejoin with them in the afterlife. Other times, the organs were cleaned and cleansed, and then returned into the body. The body cavity was then rinsed and cleaned with wine and an array of spices. The body was sewn up with aromatic plants and spices left inside. The heart stayed in the body because in the hall of judgment it would be weighted against the feather of Ma'at. In funerary practices, after the mummy was prepared, it would need to be reanimated symbolically by a priest. The opening of the mouth ceremony was conducted by a priest who would utter a spell and touch the mummy or sarcophagus with a ceremonial adze, a copper or stone blade. This ceremony ensured that the mummy could breathe and speak in the afterlife. In a similar fashion, the priest could utter spells to reanimate the mummy's arms, legs, and other body parts. One of the funerary practices followed by the Egyptians was preparing properly for the afterlife. Ka, the vital force within the ancient Egyptian concept of the soul, would not return to the deceased body if embalming was not carried out in the proper fashion. In this case, the body decayed and possibly became unrecognizable, which rendered the afterlife unattainable for the deceased person. If proper precautions were not taken, damnation would occur. Damnation meant the Egyptians would not experience the glories of the afterlife, where they became a deified figure and would be welcomed by the gods. All Egyptians were buried with at least some goods that they thought were necessary after death. At a minimum, this consisted of everyday objects such as bowls, combs, and other trinkets along with food. Wealthier Egyptians could afford to be buried with jewelry, furniture, and other valuables, which made them targets of tomb robbers. In the early dynastic period, tombs were filled with daily life objects such as furniture, jewelry, and other valuables. They also contained many stone and pottery vessels. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys learned from our report, and thank you for listening.